You can certainly tell by listening to my vowels that I'm an outside perception, because obviously I've never been in any southern speech region in my entire life. When I came to LAVIS too, I suggested that the South was especially important to United States dialects because it provided a touchstone or kind of comparison place so that almost the whole rest of the country, except for poor New York City, where everybody knows they talk crappy, but so that the whole rest of the country would know that they talked good because there was a place that talked so bad. Now, I noted, however, that Southern speakers themselves, when asked to rate their own regions, would sometimes provide a great deal of solidarity reactions among one another. So although they knew they didn't talk correctly, they did feel that they were somewhat pleasant and friendly, courteous, and so forth. And I want to review some of those data and some new ones which I think continue those interpretations, but I also want to show you some new data which I think will suggest a radically different interpretation and connect it to some social psychology and language understandings. Now, as usual, I love to show you maps. And here's a map drawn by a Chicagoan. You can see that this Chicagoan puts a circle right around Chicago and says that's normal talk for the average person. Yeah. The other interesting thing that he doesn't appear to know about Chicago is that he draws a circle around Detroit and says that's black fro talk because of the large percentage of blacks. I don't know what part of Chicago he's been into, but I'm going to go there someday and take him on a tour and suggest to him that there might be a few black people in Chicago as well as in Detroit. The important point here is, though, that this is a Chicago fellow, and the first thing he did when he drew this map was to take up his pen and go right down on the lower right-hand side and draw Southern talk, the worst English in America. Here's a Michigander, and notice that just like the Chicagoan, he finds his own talk average and normal. But down there are Southerners, interestingly, including Floridians. I don't get that in very many maps. Of course, there's some hillbillies over in Texas. Here's a South Carolinian, and just to prove to you that Southerners don't think very much of their own speech, he says this is Southern speech. It's very slow. It's hard to comprehend. And then up there is Midwest, which doesn't have an accent, as we all well know. I especially like the notation on this map, very whiny Texan. There was a Texan in the audience once who objected very much to this, and I told him I was the messenger. Now, notice here, by the way, if you look at this map, you'll see that Missouri is not in the South, but Kentucky is. And this is another South Carolinian who drew this map. This is the South where it's courteous and gentlemanly, and now we're getting these two pictures of the South, right? This is the friendly solidarity stuff, but then he also has to add, and also spoken by ignorance. Now here's another South Carolina map, but this time this one's plus Missouri and minus Kentucky, those of you who do feature analysis. And the South here is obviously the friendly and courteous place because it's in fact God's people who live there, as opposed to California where there's crazy idiots, valley girls, and surfers. The West, by the way, has got nothing special in case you wondered what was there. Well, Mom, take note of this. Now these individual maps are fun, and I love to go on showing them. But as you remember, we devised a technique for putting these maps together so that we could develop what we thought was more or less a responsible mental map or cognitive map of where dialects differ. We did this in a very straightforward way. We simply took these hand-drawn maps, put them on a digitizing pad, and traced outlines around the areas that people drew. That'd give you a formation like this, so that somebody drew a boundary over on the left, and then somebody drew one on the right, and where they overlap, then you got to count of two. You just keep doing this until you get bigger and bigger and bigger counts. The computer, of course, keeps track of them for you. The problem with this is that if you create a map where everybody has drawn an outline, then eventually you'll get a South that looks like this. Now, this is a South where obviously some of the map drawers were drunk, or some others simply had a hand that slipped way up north, because as you notice, we practically got parts of Ontario in the South here. So this won't do it all. So you say, I know what you'll do. You'll go back to that digitizing pad and you'll find just that place where everybody, there's 147 Michigan respondents, where everybody agreed there was a South. Problem is, it leaves only Columbus, Georgia. So neither one of these is in fact a very good map of the South. So just as a kind of seat of the pants realization, we said, well, let's just take 50%. Where there was a 50% overlap, there's the South. Now don't pay attention to the line, The line in there is the difference between Michigan respondents and Indiana respondents, but I'm not going to delve so deep into such stuff as that today. But there's a pretty nice representation of the South, this shaded area. That's what I call now, on this map, area number 1, the cognitive map of the dialect South, according to Michiganders. And then there's a whole bunch of other places as well. And, well, you can see there's a big South, there's a big Great Lakes area, a West. Texas is singled out individually. But today, of course, I'm going to focus primarily on this area number 1. Now, I want you to look at something particularly interesting about this. Of these 147 people who drew maps of dialect areas, and they were just told to draw circles and label those places where people spoke differently in the United States. Out of the 147 of them, 138, 94% drew a South. These are guys from Michigan. The next level down is 61% of their own area. So something, and I think we know what this is, makes the South incredibly salient. Notice, by the way, that after the local area, the very next most circled area is Area 3, which has exactly New York City in its center. Now, what should we make of all this? I think it's pretty simple. Naively, since I was trained in dialectology, I first thought that this folk dialectology or perceptual dialectology would show us what real people believed about dialects. It didn't show us that at all. What it showed us was where people believed that good English and bad English was spoke. Right? It's just that straightforward. So first of all, when you ask people where people speak differently, so well, where do they sound really bad? Oop, that's the South. Where do they sound really good? Oh, that's us. Where else do they sound really bad? Oh, that's New York City, and right on down the line. In other words, the ordering of salience of drawing boundaries around places was very definitely related to the idea of, simply related to the idea of correctness. And we see this by just going back here and look at the labels on a map, right? There's Chicago, that's normal talk, that's a good place. There's Jerseyite slang, that's in that area number 3. And then there's Southern talk, the worst English in American. Chicagoan made a little mistake in his English. That's Now, we pursued this idea much more directly because we figured this matched the nice old stuff that social psychologists and language have been telling us for a long time. On the one hand, there's status, correctness, schools doing the right thing, and on the other hand, there's solidarity, friendliness, warmth, home folks kind of talk. So we simply asked 147 people in Michigan where the best English was spoken in the United States on a scale of 1 to 10. Here's their very familiar answer. They're the only state that scores in a mean range of 8. And I want you to now look at the trip that I took, albeit by air, so I didn't touch each one of these evil places. But look what happened when I come from Michigan to Alabama. First of all, it wasn't even a 1 jump from Michigan to Indiana. That was a 2 jump, right? That was 8 down to 6. Kentucky's a 5. Tennessee's a 4. And then Alabama's a 3. So that was quite a jump in the correctness of American English. In other words, I made a hell of a trip the other day.